Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for AI Power Your Accounts Payable Process, a controller's guide to AP automation. My name's Devin Clark. I will be moderating today's session. I'm Centime's Director of Demand Generation, and I'm joining you today from Boston, Massachusetts. Feel free to share where you're joining from in the Zoom chat. We do have that open for everyone. And before we begin, I just want to go over a few housekeeping notes. So first, we are recording. So if you're curious to go back and rewatch this webinar at any point, we will be sharing the on-demand recording with you via email in the next few days. Second, we do ask that you engage with our polls. It just gives our speakers a great understanding of who you are today and helps guide the conversation. If you are joining from CPA Academy, you are required to answer at least 3 polls. So we have 4 today during the session. Once I launch a Zoom poll, there will be a pop-up on your Zoom screen where you can answer and submit your poll. If you're having any trouble with the Zoom polls today, you can just let me know in the chat or in the Q&A, and I will follow up with you via email later after the session. And then third, we are on chat and Q&A, so we encourage you to submit any questions you have for our speakers through the Q&A feature on Zoom. And Sergio and BC, I know, will do their best to answer any questions that you may have. And
Any
so
questions that you may have, anything on any topic at all, just ask and we shall be at your service.
it's so much more fun when this is an engaging conversation between the panelists that we have with you
That's
today
right,
and the
exactly.
audience. So
We
please.
have actually done lots of work on how to solve world hunger. So that's a specialty today. So, yeah.
So as you can see, we have BC Krishna here. He is our CEO and founder of Centime. And we also have Sergio Tsianos here. He's our Chief Product Officer at Centime. BC, do you want to give a little overview of who you are?
Why? Yeah, sure. Maybe like I'll just kick it off by, saying that somebody on the attendee wants to know whether we've listened to Taylor's new album and what we think about it. Opinions on this topic can vary widely. And, if we start down that path, maybe like, the attendees will drop off really quickly. So I don't know if that's the wisest thing to do. But I am BC Krishna. I'm the founder and CEO of Centime. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for joining us wherever you are, Chicago, Baltimore, Miami, Florida, California, Skokie. I am in Concord, Massachusetts, which is the birthplace of the American Revolution. It's 1 week since we had the marathon and 1 week since we had the reenactment. So if you're ever in the area, drop me a note. I'd love to give you a tour of the Old North Bridge and all that stuff.
Thank you. And
And
Sergio, do you want to give a little overview of you?
and BC is a great fan of Taylor Swift. So my name is Sergio. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Centime. We started the company back in 2019. I've been in the AP and payment space for the last 13, 14 years. My specialty is answering very difficult questions by BC. So I look forward to kind of listening to those and discussing with you and getting questions from you guys as well on, as BC said, on any topic.
What do you think
Hopefully
of
a
the
bit
new
on
Taylor Swift album? Have you listened to it? Have you heard it?
course. Yeah,
What
of
do you
course.
think?
It's amazing. I love
Come
Taylor Swift.
on. Quantity over
She was
quality,
at
I've heard.
she was at Coachella as well the other week. So yeah, she's all around the news right now.
All right. So shall we dive in? Are we ready?
Yes, let's dive in. Why don't we?
Okay. I'm going to start sharing my screen and then, kind of introduce the topic, set the stage a little bit. And we're going to spend one of the things that I think is the best way to attack an abstract concept like what is the role of AI in AP, other than the fact that both of them start with A, is to actually see the demo. And what Sergio is going to do is to take us through a little bit of the experience of how AI can actually help. And so, stay tuned for those highlights. I come at this problem, as the CEO of the company, but this is not my first rodeo, as they say. Prior to this, I started a company called Mineral Tree. Some of you may have heard of that company. I sort of founded and ran it for 8 years. Started the company in 2011, the first 3 or 4 years of that company, it was an AP automation company, one of the first sort of few AP automation companies back in 2014, 2015, when AP automation was in its infancy or not quite readily birthed yet as a category. We were knocking on people's doors and trying to convince them that there was an opportunity to really automate accounts payable. And very often we would get, blank responses and say like, go away, I'm doing fine. But, over time, people realized that as the volume complexity of, bills increased, and very importantly, as the capabilities of the solution started to match the needs of the marketplace, we're now at a place where, it's one of the hottest fintech categories in existence. And lots of people that actually attack a small piece of the problem often lay claim to being an AP automation solution. We'll spend more time on this too. So I come at it from, having spent 8 years at MineralTree and then another 4 years here. So, sometimes people ask me, am I crazy and why am I still sort of involved in AP automation? But I love it. And there's still so many more problems to be solved. Sergio and I go back a long way. Sergio and I worked together when he was a customer of ours at MineralTree. So our experience, we're sort of joined at the hip, but our experience in advancing the state of the art through the application of AI to this AP process goes a long, long way. But I'll start with the basics, right? I mean, every business has bills to pay, and that process of actually managing those bills and paying them is, of course, what people call the AP process. The nature and complexity of AP can vary quite widely. As you all know, it kind of depends on a few different factors, which I will go into. All businesses, I believe, can benefit from technical solutions to manage AP. We are now more than 10 years on into, the third and fourth generation of AP solutions. Costs have come down, capabilities have increased, cloud-based deployments have gone a long way. And we're also seeing, very importantly, an increased migration of people from legacy accounting systems and legacy ERP solutions, which tend to be on premises and sort of difficult to bring automation to more cloud-based solutions and once you get to cloud-based solutions, it's a lot easier for contemporary AP automation and AR automation solutions to plug in, more easily and provide, greater benefits. So we'll talk about that too. But one size does not fit all. All businesses can benefit from technical solutions, but one size does not fit all. One of the things that I wanted to do was to give you a little bit of a market map that may reflect your own experiences and how you should think about, AP, and how it fits into, into your world. That market map is quite complicated, like I said, because of the many dimensions that go into kind of the AP process. But hopefully it can serve as a way for you to slot yourself into the map to see exactly what works for you, and your business. So, without further ado, this is the sort of complex market map that I wanted to share with you. The general idea here is to say that, we kind of divided the universe, and this is a US-based market map. We've divided the universe into 4 different segments. One is the so-called micro businesses and self-employed people, basically what the US Census Bureau, says is about the vast majority of the companies of the 30 million businesses in the United States, about 26 million businesses are, self-employed. Non-employer businesses is what the US Census Bureau calls these. There's a next segment up where you kind of start to employ people. We'll call this small business. Again, these words are the labels associated with them are just not, there's no standard definition. So we've just kind of used this as a way to, segment the universe. So 1 to 50 employees, call it about $1 million to $5 million in revenue, roughly. The next segment up is what we call the middle market. So about 5 million to 100 million in revenue, something like that. And then finally, the large enterprise, really kind of about 20,000 businesses here, about 290,000 businesses here, about 3 or 4 million businesses here, and about 25 million businesses here. But in the context of AP automation or AP in general, I think of it as 4 different dimensions. Very importantly, there's the accounting system. modern day AP automation solutions really do have to plug in to the general ledger in order to be able to, get a look at invoices, understand what the payment terms are, being able to, complete the process of actually, creating invoices and posting them and such like. So, but many, I mean, it's also, it should be very clear to most of you that the vast majority of the people really don't have any accounting system. They will, either do it in a very ad hoc fashion. They might manage it using an Excel spreadsheet. And when you have like 10 to 20 payments and a relatively small business and generally operating out of your own consumer account as opposed to a business bank account, it's kind of there's almost a melding of what happens within your, on the personal side of the house as well as the business side of the house, right? Many times these are even folks that have part-time businesses and a full-time job. So generally speaking, the self-employed don't have an accounting system. But then once you get to be a real business, so to speak, you're starting to use some kind of an accounting system, increasingly QuickBooks Online. You probably are like, starting to think about like how to outsource your financial operations to a CPA firm that provides client accounting services. I'm shocked that people still use Sage 50, but it's still out there. There's a meaningful number of businesses that still are on Sage 50, but increasingly it's QuickBooks Online, QuickBooks and Xero. At some point, businesses outgrow that, right? And they kind of start to think about like, okay, my accounting is more complex. My needs around managing the business expand from accounting to more ERP type functions, HR, payroll, things like that. And so people start to think about like the next generation of solutions. Once again, I've highlighted the 4 or 5 that are broad market solutions that are taking market share away from QuickBooks and Xero and Sage 50, and also very importantly, taking market share away from the 200 or so long tail of legacy accounting, legacy and vertical specific accounting systems. Now, some of those vertical specific accounting systems are never going to go away, right? I mean, some of you may be users of them, like in one of the examples that I often like to use is in rental real estate. There's a solution from a company called Yardi. Very good solution. About 7,000 rental real estate customers use Yardi for their accounting and for their ERP. Probably not going to leave that, right? Similarly, nonprofit, you have a certain product that's used there. In commercial construction, you have Sage 300 CRE. Although that's being migrated by Sage into Intact, right? But generally speaking, I believe that over the next 5 or 10 years, this long tail of, accounting systems is going to get shorter and be replaced by the broad market solutions as these broad market solutions get better in serving the verticals themselves. And then finally, if you think about it, right, there's nothing, a few, there's this explosion in the middle, the bulge right in the middle of many accounting systems. And then finally, you've got a little bit of compression once again. It's not as like tight as that, but I've just highlighted the top 3 that you would find in the enterprise. Very important because obviously an AP solution has to work well within the accounting system, the general ledger that you use today. What I mean by work well means is that it's integrated properly. The user experience is like, stellar. Things like synchronization of data is, really bulletproof. All the dark corners that are unique to that particular systems are properly handled. Those are the things that really matter. 80% of what you do in AP is pretty straightforward. You can say, yeah, process an invoice, make a payment, but often it's the exceptions that really become problematic. And trust me, I've lived this in my last company. Sometimes it's the sort of the exceptions, it's the corner cases in accounting, in invoice processing, in approvals that sometimes become really painful. That's where, the capabilities of the accounting system really become important.
And BC, I'm just going to interrupt very briefly just to let everyone know, because we're talking about accounting systems, the poll number 1 is up and we're going to be closing that within a minute or so. All right, I'll let you carry on, BC.
But why? So Trevor wants to know if we can send out the slide deck. I believe that this is going to be available to the audience, right, Devin?
Yes, we'll make this available also within that email where you'll get the on-demand recording and the slide deck.
Yeah. So, the thing that I kind of will spend some time on here is like, 2 super important topics, right? Look, at the end of the day, if you're a self-employed micro business, that has basically 5 or 10 or 15 bills, there's really, you have to ask the question whether you really do need some kind of a dedicated AP automation solution, right? And the question is, well, maybe not. I believe that everybody should get one for the reasons which we'll go into later. But the urgency that you have to adopt an AP automation solution is largely driven by two factors, I believe, right? One is the volume of invoices, and the second is the complexity of the process. We'll spend more time on this, but you can see, in my experience working at MineralTree, we found that the moment you get to about 75 or 100 invoices per month, that's when people start to pick their head up and say, okay, maybe I can benefit from a solution that helps me automate. And we are in this world today where there's a range of extremely good solutions, including, of course, ours. But the key point here is that the pricing of these solutions has really been set up so that they scale very well from businesses that have relatively small volumes to businesses that have very high volumes. The second is that these solutions have gotten to the point where, it's not a big IT project. It can be installed and implemented and run really, really well. The third, very importantly, is that for the most part, these solutions mirror processes that you follow today. As you get into the larger, obviously, once you get into these larger volumes, it's inevitable that businesses, have the need to do some volume of some kind of AP automation. The anecdote that I'll use is that, basically AP automation didn't start in the universe of smaller businesses. It started in the universe of larger businesses. And one of the kind of stories that I heard early on in the days of MineralTree was the Mayo Clinic, right, that processes 125,000 invoices every month. And when you have 125,000 invoices every month, then can you imagine being able to, capture and code those invoices manually? That just doesn't work. So, that's where it started. And over the course of the last 10 years, what we found is that those solutions have moved down market, become better at meeting the needs of the down market solutions. The third issue, which the reason why I would say somebody would want to adopt a solution, is complexity. And largely, this is the complexity of the end-to-end AP process, invoice processing, as well as payment processing. Down in the kind of, self-employed segment, this is bill pay, right? Really, really simple. Snap your fingers, enter a bill, and pay it. It's not very complicated. You don't need segregation of duties, all this stuff. You're probably using your bank's bill pay solution just as you do as you do as a consumer. But as you get into a real business, right? I mean, once you have 5 or 10 people within your company, you have a CPA solution that you're using. You start to think about segregation of duties and invoice processing, capture, some controls associated with the payment mechanism. You get a little bit bigger. Maybe you start to think about hey, listen, I needed to have a purchase order based process. Even if a small business, has a certain type of operating rhythm to it, you might start to introduce POs. And then when you get into the really large businesses, I use the example of, of the Mayo Clinic. That's a pretty complicated process. Now you have potentially multiple divisions, international, divisions, foreign exchange processing. It just becomes more complex and often, inevitable that you have to start by thinking about what's the best solution for you. And you start to see things like treasury management solutions starting to bring capabilities here. So the solution type itself matters, right? I mean, this is what I mean by saying that, you got to find the Goldilocks zone for your business. One size does not fit all. You don't want to be buying solutions that are too complicated if you're relatively small. Conversely, I don't think that you want to be thinking about tiny little solutions, rinky-dink solutions that are meant for smaller businesses that can suddenly become applicable to you as a larger businesses. We routinely find, for example, that we target, as you can see, we target businesses that are between 50 and 1,000 employees, and we routinely see people that have been using bill as a solution, worked really well when you're small, but then as you get a little bit bigger, the limitations of that solution start to become, apparent. So these are some of the things that I wanted to do, was to just really kind of lay out a market map. And obviously, when you kind of, I hope this is useful. and you start to think about like, where you slot and where your business, can fit. But the thing that I wanted to do next is to really spend some time on this issue of complexity, right? And complexity is a thing that is difficult to define, but I'll try to make it as concrete as possible. At the end of the day, the AP process consists of two separate but related and connected functions, right? The first step, of course, is to be able to process invoices, and the second step is to pay the invoices. If you think about paying the invoices, it's actually not that complicated conceptually. You send a payment by check, by ACH, by credit card, and then you send the remittance detail along to the supplier so that they can then reconcile the payment, from an AR perspective, right? Pretty straightforward. It's still the case that about 40–50% of payments are checks. One of the reasons why it continues to persist is because, hey, it's easy for me to send the payment to an address that I already have on file. Most checks include remittance detail. Business checks include remittance detail, so that problem is solved. But obviously, we're now seeing this kind of shift and movement towards ACH and credit card, as being necessary for a variety of reasons, which we'll go into later. But the key thing here is from a complexity standpoint, and this is where we'll talk about how AI can really help in the AP process. The processing of invoices is complicated. It's painful, right? You have to, you receive, in an ideal world, the invoices come to you from the supplier, fully captured and fully coded, right? It just comes right to you and said, like, I said, I got all of the line items, of all of the information is properly structured. All I have to do is to approve and post. But it doesn't work that way. It starts with a PDF document. In worst cases, it is a paper document that the data needs to be extracted. Some people call this OCR, which is the wrong term for the record. OCR is optical character recognition. But really what it comes down to is extracting the characters from the page and then assigning meaning to it to know, for example, what's an invoice number, what is the amount, what are the terms. Those are the things that represent the capture process. But then, like, one of the more painful parts, as you know, of the AP process is actually to be able to code the line items, right? To say that this line item belongs to this category. And then it gets progressively worse from there, right? Because depending upon how complex your processes are, you might need to then have the entire invoice approved through an ad hoc process, or maybe every line item needs to be, approved based on the fact that, your supplier has, you have a supplier that provides 6 different categories of items. Managing approvers. Who are the approvers? What are their rights? What are their privileges? What happens if they go on vacation? What happens if they don't respond to things? These are things that become an issue. Matching your invoices against purchase orders, a very painful process. It's actually interesting that the burden of invoice processing, when you go from ad hoc approvals to purchase order-based approvals, you're introducing an order of magnitude increase in complexity. And this is where AI can really, really help in every one of these items, right? Whether you're capturing data, coding the line items, matching 2- and 3-way PO matching against invoices are really where AI can really shine in simplifying and streamlining the process. Again, we'll go into that in some more detail. But once you're sort of comfortable that you've got your liability, which is what AP is, real, then what you have to do is to post it to the general ledger, which has more complexity associated with it. Is it in a period, the accounting period that's already closed? Do you store the document with it? All these kinds of things that you have to like really worry about. And then finally, there are things like, detecting duplicates and managing exceptions, because it turns out the document you received was like, there's a whole bunch of things that you have to worry about. You receive a document, an invoice from a supplier you didn't have in the system. So my point is, not to belabor it, is that, if you compare the complexity of payment versus the complexity of processing invoices, I really feel like the complexity in AP largely comes from invoice processing, and I hope you guys agree. And if you don't, then please say so. But those of you that are in the AP world, basically kind of, hopefully agree with this perspective. And again, this is where the volumes come in, right? So, even if you have 5 or 10 or 15 invoices and you have to follow a complicated process of capturing invoices, coding them, and posting them, that gets dramatically worse once your volumes go up. That's what I was trying to say, which is that volume and complexity go hand in hand. And that's kind of where I think AP can really help. Capture, coding, and approval are the most painful parts of invoice processing. And I wanted to just really kind of share one more slide, couple more slides, and then we'll, hand it off to Sergio. How capture, coding, and approval has evolved over the last 10 years is really, really interesting, right? I mean, this is, just to put it into context, right? In 2014, 2015, we were knocking on doors trying to get people to think about how to automate accounts payable. And the response we got was go away, right? But 10 years later, what we're seeing is a pretty significant evolution in how, even forgetting about payments, just looking at capture, coding, and approval to see how it has evolved. Obviously, the first generation, or the most primitive generation, if you want to call it that, is the manually capture and code, right? So you got the invoice, you manually enter all the data, and then you manually code. Then what we had was a second generation, which is what I'll call outsourced capture. And when I started Mineral Tree, that was the big aha, right? So we said like, okay, guess what? I can take an invoice and, do this kind of, send the invoice off to an agency that basically does a combination of automated capture plus some validation of the data to ensure that when the structured invoice comes back, it is considered to be like 99% accurate. I think it's still the case that some AP automation solutions still have the same approach, which is basically human in the loop as far as the capture is concerned. It works, but it's slow, it can be painful, it can be full of errors, but I think we've moved on from that second generation. But once the capture is complete, you're still doing manual coding. You might have had some primitive PO matching, simple stuff, exception handling, that kind of thing. That was what I'll describe as a second generation. Then in the last, I would say 5 years or so, what we've had is a little bit more of describe it as a real-time capture. So in other words, you take the document and you run it through a process where the extraction of the data as well as the classification of the words on the page is done in real time. Excellent results. Lots of solution provides for it, and it kind of, really dramatically cuts down the amount of time that it takes between when the document is presented, for capture and when the capture results are obtained. Again, just to be clear, these tend to be syntax and semantics of words on the page as opposed to coding, right? Now I've got all of the data, properly captured. But then you started to see a little bit more of rule-based coding, right? So I don't have to code every invoice every time. So I see the invoice, I have some rules for how it's to be coded. If class, department, location is this, then code it to be this, right? So those kinds of rules you started to see embedded in sort of this third generation of solutions. People started to bring PO match. The other one point I'll make is that in the last 10 years, what I've seen is that more organizations are actually smaller organizations are gravitating towards POs, right? It never used to be the case that POs were as prevalent as they are today. But what I'm seeing is that more organizations, smaller organizations, the same kind of automation that we see in AP, in the finance department, we're also seeing in purchasing. Solutions are moving down market. PO solutions are becoming more feature rich, easier to afford. And who wouldn't want to have a purchasing solution that improves my controls and simplifies my process? So what we're seeing is therefore more POs as well, in the purchase to pay process. And as a result, you also started to see a little bit more maybe simple stuff that does direct matching. So in other words, if there's a match between an invoice line item and a PO line, exact match between an invoice line item and a PO line item, the description matches, the amount matches, the quantity matches, great, we're good. But as you all know, the PO process is full of exception handling, and that's really where some of the challenges lie. And that brings me to the fourth generation. And the fourth generation really kind of improves the accuracy of the capture by using AI. And then the real kind of advance, I would say, has been around the use of AI to improve the coding of the line items. I would say that, again, hopefully you all agree that one of the most painful parts of accounts payable, uh, painful subparts, all of this is painful, but the most painful subparts of accounts payable is the coding process, right? You have to like, figure out what, what category, what account, like any given line item belongs to. And if you have like the same invoice, same kind of invoice being received from the same kind of supplier, week in and week out, the drudgery of having to do that manually, even if the system makes it, easier for you to do, is very, very painful. So the degree to which AI can help you with capture and coding and PO matching, this is where I think the advances are. So this is kind of, what I wanted to do and set up, which is to kind of turn it over to you, Sergio. And, maybe you can walk us through the wonders of, AI and AP. And then when you're done, I wanted to kind of run through a few other things to keep in mind, because AP is not just about paying bills. At some level, I think, the next generation of AP solutions really is about recognizing that AP is a critical part of the cash management process, and AP properly managed. Maybe I'll just do that. So does that make sense, Sergio? I'll just sort of walk through the cash management component of it, and then I can turn it over to you. Is that okay?
Let's do that, yes.
Okay. So AP is not just about processing invoices and making payments, right? The way I think about it is that AP is core to cash management. Simply put, AP drains working capital, right? And so very, very the current sort of crop of accounts payable automation solutions does a very good job of helping businesses capture code and make payments against the invoices, post and make payments against the invoices. That's table stakes. That's necessary. But let's also recognize that AP drains working capital. And somewhere in your process every day, the AP department is making 4 decisions. Which bill am I going to pay? How much of that bill am I going to pay? When am I going to pay it? And what source of capital liquidity that I'm going to use to pay it? Those 4 decisions are a precursor to the actual paying of the bill. And those 4 decisions are all founded on how much cash you have, right? I mean, to state the obvious, if you had a choice between paying a bill to a supplier and making payroll, hopefully none of you is in that situation. You know which choice you're going to make. I'm being dramatic, but the point is, the whole idea is that AP is an element of cash management. But and cash, as they say, is the lifeblood of business, and every effective cash management is important. But AP is part of several interrelated processes, and I just wanted to sort of highlight that for you, right? Like I said, AP drains working capital, and you want to be able to capture code, post, and pay. But at some level, what you want to do is to look at your days payables outstanding, which is the metric that is used to link AP to working capital. At some level, your AP system, your AP automation system should help you extend your days payables outstanding, understand what your days payables outstanding are, and how it trends, right? So critical element of it. But AP is one side of the working capital story. AR is the other side of it, right? In as much as AP is about extending days payables outstanding, AR is about shortening days sales outstanding. And so that means, again, like AR has a tactical component to it. AR is about making sure that you present invoices, that you manage collections in disputes, that you receive payments from your customers, that you post against the open receivable, right? These are important elements to it. But both AP and AR can benefit from a really important component of, the financial of reporting, which is your forecast, right? And how does forecast matter? Well, the forecast can help you determine, it can serve as a map to help you determine which bills to pay. If, for example, in your forecast, you see that your cash is dipping 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, just when a big bill is due, you might want to think about, like, what is the strategy that you use to pay that bill? You might want to push it out by 2 weeks so that the cash doesn't drop below the level that you want it to be at. So forecast plays a big role and serves as a map to help you manage your AP more effectively. Conversely, the decisions that you make in AP, let's say you choose to make a payment, push it out by, choose to push a payment out by 10 days, or choose to make a payment on a credit card. That should then, by implication, it should also impact your forecast, right? So there's a correlation between the forecast and the accounts payable process, which is really about optimizing working capital. Similarly in AR, and I won't belabor the point, right? Forecast should help you determine which collections to go after, what terms to provide to the customer so that you get paid faster, how do you kind of, correspond with them so that you can kind of, get them to pay the bills more quickly. these are basic things that you need to be able to do. And, managing risk is another element of it. We're constantly sort of hit by fraudsters. How do we make sure that, as part of a cash management process, I protect myself against bad things happening, whether it's a fraudsters coming after me or whether it's a bank that, like Silicon Valley Bank is a great example of taking risks that put my capital, my deposits at risk because you made bad decisions, right? I don't think like, I don't want to ever go forward in a situation assuming that banks are always going to be making good decisions. Banks are wonderful things. They're necessary to the economy, obviously, but we don't really know what risks they take. And I want to make sure that I manage the risks associated with banks going under. And a couple of other things is to monitor performance and then ensure that if it turns out that you need credit, you have access to it. Way I think about it is, yes, AP is about like, managing a very tactical process. AI has a role to play in AP, but AI has a role to play in all of these other areas. AI has a role to play in forecasting cash. AI has a role to play in managing AR. We are at a very, very critical point where this new technology, the new set of capabilities, is going to bring dramatic improvements to the office of the CFO. And that's really, at some level, if I step back from AI and AP, what we're here to talk about. So let me kind of turn that over to you, Sergio, and then have you take us, through this, and we'll spend some time later on risk.
Thanks, BC. If you can stop. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So let me see. Are you able to see my screen?
We can, Sergio. It's great.
Okay. Great. So let's go through the roles of, I think what I would like to do is like be very practical about what the roles of AI is within the accounts payable process so that we can ground all the points that BC very well made. There are basically four or five parts in the accounts payable process. When we talk about processing invoices, the very first part is looking at an invoice document, recognizing what is on the invoice document, and being able to use the context on the invoice document to correctly attribute what are the different fields into actual fields that you need to use to process an invoice through your workflow. So let's take a very practical example. I'm going to click on, this is our Centeam's accounts payable module. Documents are anything that is basically invoices that are still not posted to your general ledger, to NetSuite, to QuickBooks, to Sage, to whatever you're using. So they're still unapproved before they become an open accounts payable. And I've already uploaded a few documents in my demo environment. Obviously, it's important that whatever solution you choose supports a different types of documents. Suppliers might send PDFs, might send Word documents, might send Excel files, might send like paper invoices, although these are starting to kind of reduce in scope by suppliers. But fundamentally, we need to be able to process any kind of document and recognize the characters from any type of document. Now, if I click on an example here, Coca Office Supplies, what basically we see is what you would expect to see from an AP solution. You have a document, you have an invoice that has been received by the supplier. And then what we are doing is basically extracting the data from this document and structuring the data into their relevant, basically, fields. So if I were to draw a parallel with like 10 years ago, what people did back then, which was on BC's slide, is that you actually had human beings who sat somewhere in the world. They received documents. There was some OCR technology that picked up the characters from the document, from the invoice, and then people were tasked to basically say, okay, this 100 number is a quantity, this 50 cents is a price, this ballpoint pens blue is a description. So what AI does basically is, and what natural language processing as part of AI does, is it reads a document in the same way that as a human being would read the document. So they can understand, with the use of AI, we can automate the understanding of the context, which means essentially that, number one, AI in the whole process of data extraction, data capture, can significantly increase the upfront accuracy when extracting the data from a document. It can significantly increase the addition of meaning to the different fields of an invoice. So understanding that, for example, an invoice is this, the supplier is called Coca Coffee Supplies, the invoice number is this number. Other documents, let's take a more complex example. Let's take this one. Other documents might have, for example, ship-to addresses, might have various different items and product codes. Let's take this example here. It basically, this has a bill to address, it has a ship-to address, it has payment terms, due date, it has a balance, it has a date when the invoice was issued, it has who sent it, the address of the sender, which could be different to the to the bill to address. Of course, it has items, quantities, rates, amounts. It has a sales tax. Other invoice might have shipping fees. So all of these things, it might sound simple because we are reading the document, but in order to get technology to accurately represent what lives in this document, that's the role of AI and natural language processing that comes in. And fundamentally, with that, we can guarantee near 100% accuracy on the extraction of the first time that we extract the document, and we can also do 100% accuracy on any subsequent extraction of a document that comes from the same supplier, because the system learns basically and can always accurately attribute basically what it reads from the document to actually the fields that this is supposed to be positioned. So you can see that on this example, we have the document on the left, and then we have basically successfully extracted the sales tax as an expense line, and we have basically extracted all the items from here, all the description of the items. And with the use of AI, what we also do is we basically automatically link the actual item that the supplier sends to the item code that lives in NetSuite, so or in the general ledger. So if the business is using item codes, we can use AI to basically learn from how these item codes in the general ledger represent the descriptions from the supplier and automatically link those two things. So fundamentally, from an invoice capture and data extraction point of view, generative AI, natural language processing, can significantly increase the accuracy of the extraction, can assign meaning to what is extracted. So somebody doesn't need to say, this is an invoice number, this is a ship to address, this is a description, and can also create the necessary linkages between what a supplier sends and what lives in the general ledger, so that the user doesn't need to do this manually themselves. So that's the whole evolution of the whole invoice capture technology. And that's why we strongly believe that it's incorrect to say, I'm looking for an OCR, optical character recognition technology, to saying that I'm looking for a technology that can fully streamline the process of capturing data from an invoice and correctly assigning meaning to them. That's the evolution of basically AI from an invoice capture point of view. The second part, very importantly, is the coding. Every single person that comes to us and says, I want a solution for AP, they're saying, I don't want to code invoice anymore. It's very painful. I cannot be manually coding every single invoice that comes in. So what we've done is basically built an AI-based coding automation solution in-house that allows us to basically look at any invoice that comes in, and after we accurately extract the data, we look at the history of all invoices from this and other suppliers, and we try to identify which are the most closely coded invoices from the historically coded invoices that this business has. By doing that, what we achieve is basically, and I'll click on my coding tab here, what we achieve fundamentally is what we call automated coding. So coding becomes more of an exception. I have a new supplier, I have a new invoice, I have a new type of item that I'm buying from the supplier, therefore we've never coded this before, as opposed to the norm where I have to code everything manually. In this example here, and this is a very a coding interface that we've developed specifically to make the whole coding experience much simpler. What we've done is basically say, you see these blue outlines, all these fields, which this is an item, this is an item code, this is a location, this is a department. All of these, we basically predict them based on historical invoice which have been coded against Coca Office Supplies. So we have predicted what is the item code, and you can see that, for example, you know that very well. When a supplier sends ballpoint pens blue as the description of the item the supplier is selling, this item might be saved in the general ledger as pen. So that mapping is automatically done by Centim by learning from historically coded invoices. Similarly, we can use things like the SIP2 address to identify what is the location for this line, for this invoice. We can use the person who is the invoice is directed to identify what department this invoice belongs to, and so on and so forth. So all of that process, rather than, as I said, with the use of AI, we completely remove the need for the user manually having to code things, to actually learning from how things are coded in the past, and then applying that coding in the future. So it becomes more of an exception as opposed to a day-to-day invoice by invoice process. So far, what we've done is, with the use of AI, we've eliminated the need for users, for people who are processing AP, accounting managers, accounts payable clerks, accounts payable operators, to have to extract and key data manually. And we've completely eliminated the need to identify what the supplier has on the invoice versus what lives in the general ledger, for example, item codes. And we've completely eliminated the need for coding of invoices apart from exceptions, which will always exist, right? So what we're trying to do is achieve straight-through processing on everything. Exceptions will always exist, but we've eliminated many parts of the manual process so far. So capture, coding. Now, what we've talked so far is normal invoices, which are not based on the purchase order. A normal invoice, of course, will have to be approved. So what we also have is approval workflows. These are not AI-based. These are rule-based approval workflows where the business can define their own policies. And based on different parameters on an invoice, these policies will trigger. For example, this is an office supplies invoice. And as this is an office supplies invoice, there are two approvers that need to approve it based on the value of the invoice. So invoice approval workflows to basically ensure that any invoice that is non-PO based can be routed to the appropriate people in the business for approval. And that means collaboration with other parts outside of AP to completely digitize the process of processing invoices and approving those invoices before they get posted to the general ledger. Now, what I wanted to focus for a second is that, of course, as BC said, with the evolution of procurement systems and procurement overall and putting more control around procurement, the more than 75% of business that we speak to have started using or are heavily using purchase orders. So what we do on the PO side is that, of course, we need to support two-way or three-way matching of POs, invoices, and receipts. There was a question in the channel a few minutes ago about how we manage receipts, how we manage goods receipts and services receipts. So what we do on the PO side is very similar on the first part. So we automatically extract all the data from an invoice, obviously, because that's the first part of the process. Now, once we extract the data from an invoice using AI, the second thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we understand that this is a PO-based invoice. So here we have automatically detected the PO number and detected that this is a PO-based invoice. And then what we need to do is we need to look at the open POs. We need to look at this specific PO. We need to look at the lines of the invoice, and we need to automatically identify which lines of the PO this invoice represents. That is the most complex part, one of the most complex parts of the PO matching process. It's finding what line that lives on an invoice is correlated to which line that lives on the purchase order. So what we do is, again, we use AI and looking at all the historical processed invoices, POs, suppliers, etc., to figure out how to best link the two documents together, how to link each line of the invoice to each line of the purchase order. And once we link them, you see that we have successfully linked all of these 6-7 lines. Once we link them, then we say, okay, now that we've linked them, do they match or do they not match? This is an example where everything is a perfect match. So if I click on any of these lines, we see that we've done a three-way matching. The invoice quantity was 50. The unbilled received quantity was 50. That's where the receipt comes in. This is basically what has been received, but not yet billed out of this PO. So there is a perfect three-way match in this case. However, and of course, as we discussed, the goal is to achieve straight-through processing. So wherever there are no exceptions, this invoice now, if you think about it as an AP operator, we haven't touched the extraction, we haven't touched the line linking, we haven't touched the matching between the PO and the invoice. And what the AP operator needs to do is say, okay, great, mark this as approved, post it, and then it becomes a payable. Now, let's use another example where we have a PO-based invoice that has not been fully matched. There are some exceptions. So in this case, where there are exceptions, what we do, and you can see that here, this invoice has a lot of exceptions actually. It has a rate mismatch, it has a quantity mismatch, and it has some threshold basically matches that need to be reviewed. In this case, what we do is we enable the business to not only say that this invoice is in AP, and the moment I need to engage the warehouse, I need to basically, send them an email, a paper document, go to their desk and leave the invoice. We allow the business to basically route this invoice for review to the appropriate stakeholders so that all these mismatches can be resolved with an audit trail within Centim and can basically be, once they're resolved, then the invoice can become an open payable for the business. So in this case, using AI, we have, again, automatically linked all the items. We have identified what all the matches and the mismatches are. We have also have the ability to set certain thresholds for the business so that not everything becomes a mismatch, but this is a threshold in which case it could be approved by the business. And now the next step is, again, to drive the collaboration within the business. And as you can see here, what we've done is basically have a rate and quantity mismatch policy. This rate and quantity mismatch policy has automatically triggered because we identified some rate mismatches, some quantity mismatches. And now this will be routed to the appropriate stakeholders for review. And the whole process, therefore, nicely managed within the product. So what we've talked about now is the role, and I'm going very quickly, sorry, because BC left me very little time, just to be clear. I don't speak so fast normally. So we've talked about the role of AI in extracting the data and giving sense to the data from an invoice. We've talked the role of AI to completely remove or reduce the need for any manual coding that is done on an invoice. We've talked about the role of AI to automatically link and match POs to invoices and goods receipts, service receipts, nodes. And now what we have basically is with all these things, all these AI use cases that we grounded, basically, these are the actual, things that we do on the ground. We have managed to fundamentally remove a lot of the manual tasks that happen through this AP process. And the role of the user becomes on reviewing, providing oversight, and helping the business resolve exceptions so that there are no delays, there are no invoices stuck in the process, there's no accruals needed because the reviewers have not been basically providing their approvals, and so on and so forth. Now, I want to spend 2 minutes on the second part, and then we can decide what we do next. The second part is once I got logged out. 1 second.
And while you fill this out, Sergio, I just want everyone to know that we did launch poll number 4, so you can take your time to answer that while you get your code here.
What is happening here? So the second part of the process now is once a bill is posted to is approved and posted to the general ledger, at that point we need to make sure that it gets paid. And a key part of what Centim does is basically use our connected cash management fundamentally capabilities to enable the business not just to pay a bill, as BC was saying, but to also think about how to manage cash for the business through AP. So let me just very quickly go to my instance. Second. So what we do fundamentally is enable the business to say, I have 10 bills which are due this week. Okay. These bills, I can make choices about when to pay them, how to pay them, and actually who to pay. So if I look at my unpaid invoices, what we can see here is that I have, let's look at this. I have a $30,000 bill, which actually is due on the 25th of April. So in the next couple of days. Now, if I look at because we have visibility into the cash flow forecast of the business, what this means is that we can look at the next couple of weeks of payments, and we can decide what need to be paid when. So if this supplier is chasing us and says, you know what, you need to pay me early, you need to pay me on the due date, I'm not going to accept basically a payment later. We have to change the date. So if I change the date and make it the 25th, which basically is the due date, what will happen up here is basically I will see a dip. I will see a dip on my cash flow because the blue line, the dark blue line now becomes my closing balance over the next 2 weeks. There's a cash impact of minus $30,000 because I've moved the payment earlier. And that's how the business can create context about how they can manage the business. So if the supplier says, I want you to pay me early, and we see that we have a dip in the business, a dip in the cash flow of the business, a dip in the closing balance, what can I do? I could potentially decide that, you know what, I'm going to pay you on the due date, but I'm going to use a credit card to pay you. And if I use a credit card to pay you, then we can see that this dip will go away because the credit card will now be payable in the future on the statement date, which could be 30, 50, 40, 50 days later. So that means that as a business and as an AP team, I can now act as an advisor to the cash of the business. And many businesses that come to us say, you know what we do every week on a Friday, we will print our AP that is due this week. We'll go to our CFO and we'll sit down and we'll say, pay this one, don't pay this one, don't pay this one, pay this one. Oh, and this is the, likely the closing balance of the business. So it's a very manual process. But if you connect the dots between AP and cash management, it means that the AP department becomes more strategic, and it means that they can make decisions that directly impact the cash flow of the business. So that's where we connect the dots between not only automating the AP process, but elevating the role of the AP team to become a strategic advisor of basically cash and cash flow of the business. And that was a very, very quick, fast run through of our AI and AP capabilities. BC, anything to add?
Well, thank you, Sergio. I think we're kind of right up against the clock. The only thing that I wanted to add is that I feel like I always need to bring back the conversation and the discussion, to security. I think AP is a process that, disperses cash. And when you disperse cash, then some really bad things can happen. We found time and time again, there are instances of internal and external fraud that, cause people to really, be impacted by fraud. And so, what we have done is to implement, a range of controls that limit the risk that bad things happen. These are controls that mitigate the risk of both internal and external fraud. But in the end, there is always a residual risk. And what we have done is to actually ensure to provide an additional level of fraud protection so that, if despite the company losing money to, let's say, a third-party fraudster, we basically, cover that risk to the tune of $100,000 per incident. Now, businesses don't pay extra for it. It's just part and parcel of the solution we provide. So that's the only thing that I wanted to add, which is to make sure that whether it's AP or cash management in general, that the element of protecting yourself against bad things happening is addressed.
Thanks, BC. And thanks, Sergio. I know you were short on time with your demo, but you were able to squeeze everything in there. So we appreciate that. I know a lot of people throughout the chat were kind of curious about who we integrate with. So we do integrate right now with QuickBooks Online, QuickBooks Desktop, NetSuite, and Sage Intacct. If you are one of those users within those ERP systems or accounting systems, you may be eligible to win AirPods with us. So I would encourage you to check out sendtime.com/demo. I'm going to drop the URL in our chat right now. So if you're interested, you can check out a demo with one of our SendTime experts to walk you through maybe a personalized use case that you're looking for, whether it's for AP. And we also, like we've mentioned throughout the session, we also do AR. So check out sendtime.com/demo. And again, Sergio, BC, I really appreciate your time today. I think it was a really thoughtful discussion all around how we're utilizing the power of AI with SendTime right now to help out a lot of clients on their AP use cases and save a lot of time in the long run. So
we have 2 more minutes, Devin. Any
yes.
other questions we feel like, non-AP related that we want to answer? What was the consensus on Taylor Swift? I mean, you and I bantered about it, but, I didn't see anybody respond saying, whether they liked it or not.
I know, I'm not sure if there are a ton of people in the chat right now. One of our HR team members is a Swiftie till the end. I think she's gone to maybe 15 concerts of Taylor Swift. So
More.
next time we're maybe going to have Callie on here to share her thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess there are a few questions around polls. So poll number 4 did end. If anyone, I'll go through all of the answers. If anyone didn't get to their 3 polls to receive credit, I will follow up with you via email after the session. It sounds like
All right.
Allison wanted to clarify that she is not a Swiftie. So maybe we would be okay if we, depending on our truthful answers of her
Who's
release.
not a Swiftie? Callie is not a Swiftie? Callie is a Swiftie, isn't she?
No, it seems like Allison, who's on the chat right now, who's joining, who maybe asked the initial question of what we
Oh, I
thought of
see.
the Taylor Swift concert. But Allie would like to clarify she's not a Swiftie either.
That's right. Okay. Well, I think that there was another sort of clarification is that, this is the AirPod thing is not a raffle. You just show up for the demo and you get AirPods.
Yes, exactly. Just show up by the demo. You must complete that demo by the end of this month, so April 30th. So I would say try to book a time as soon as possible with our team, and we'd love to chat more with you. All right, well, it looks like we're at our 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Sergio, it's a little later for you, so we'll give everyone some time back. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, BC.
Thanks a
Thanks,
lot.
Sergio.